Hi everyone, and welcome to our fifth and final training for Model as a Master PAL. Today we will be doing the last two letters of our acronym, appropriate prompting and let the child lead. We have successfully made it through the parts before that, so congratulations to everyone who's made it this far. Just as a reminder, we are working with the terms master and pal. Pal referring to a friend, a support partner, a communication partner, someone who's there to support you. And a master is someone who is skilled at a particular practice. Again, when we reference AAC, we're referencing augmentative and alternative communication, which is an umbrella term encompassing all the communication methods and tools that someone might use to supplement or replace spoken or written language. Again, the Communication Bill of Rights is a doctrine that identifies the rights that our students with complex communication needs have, and we're specifically focusing on the one that says that students have the right to be taught how to use a communication system, and that's why we're here to learn to be good communication partners. So today we will be focusing on the first section, which is appropriate prompting. Before I even get to the definition, I wanted to kind of highlight that prompting is kind of one of those messy areas. Prompting might be something that you're familiar with when you look at an IEP and you see a child's benchmark or goal area reference different types of prompts that are required to get to the goal. Prompting could be very technical in its language, but what I want to really focus on, and I really want your outcome to be from this section, is that you understand that prompts are both beneficial, but can be detrimental to the development if they're not phased out. And that's really the idea here that we want to take away, is that prompts are there to help someone get somewhere else. And that kind of leads into the definition. But we want to make sure that they're not something that remains static and that they're kind of fluid and moving. So the definition that we're working with is prompting is a supported level of cueing or assistance to move one to action. So the goal, obviously, that why we're here and how we talk about communication is that we want autonomy, which is the ability to make choices according to one's own free will. We want our students to have independence in terms of their thoughts and their expression and even understanding. We want them to be independent in that. And so prompting might help them get there, but it shouldn't remain static and it shouldn't remain there all the time. So for a child to become independent, he or she must understand that her unique voice is being heard. So we are going to be talking about various types of prompting. Some of these are actually parts of our acronym for Model as a Master PAL. So motivate, right? Motivation is its own type of prompt. Motivation gets you to do something. If you're motivated to look good in the new year, you might be motivated right now to go to the gym more often, or go take a spin class, or eat healthy, or just favor your health in general. But there is some kind of internal motivation that is prompting you to do so. We talked about wait time, and not just in development, but also when you're communicating with your students. And so a pause or an expectant look, that wait time is a prompt in and of itself. And we will talk a little bit more about how our prompting hierarchies move for what we call either intrusive to least intrusive, or least to greatest. All of these terms might be used interchangeably, but motivation and a pause or an expectant look aren't necessarily what we would call invasive or intrusive. They're pretty natural. They happen all the time. Verbal and auditory cues are something that we probably all are familiar with. Visual points, gestures, we all use those all the time. If we think back to our accept multiple modalities section, we talked about how some people are just gesturing a lot when they talk. They talk with their hands, some might say. And so that's just a natural cue that happens, or a prompt, in order to get someone to look at something or do something or go towards a specific direction. Physical and light touch, partial physical, full physical, all of these types of prompts are also going to be talked about today. And all of these exist in our own lives. And so before we move into our handout, the handout right here, I'm circling it with my mouse, we'll click open to the first handout that's in the email. It is a white paper with just black text. It's the formality versions of prompting. You'll see a lot of things like minimal, maximal, independent. And that's just to get you familiar with the different types of prompts that are out there. Some of the more user-friendly handouts that we'll reference are going to talk about prompting in a more naturalistic way. So we're going to talk about a student with AAC, but before I even do that, I would like to talk about, or have you think about, some prompts you use in your own life, right? So we all use prompts. I use a calendar. I use reminders on my cell phone. I use a little sticker on my dishwasher that says clean or dirty to prompt me to remember to empty the dishwasher when it's clean or dirty. There are a bunch of different ways that we use just prompts in our daily life. We talked about some verbal prompts that we might give. If you're a parent, you might give your children very direct prompts to do something. You might give them some indirect prompts that get them thinking about what they should be doing if they're not already doing it. But if we just think about our own lives, taking AAC out of it for a moment, we'll realize that prompting is very prevalent. And there's a lot of prompts that happen day in and day out that make us do things, or make people in our family do things, or make people at our jobs do things. So now if we think about students who use AAC, what level of prompting does your student require to request a motivator? A lot of people at our table at our training this week reflected that their students don't need a lot of prompting necessarily to request something that's motivating, because that motivation is there to get them to do that action. You might need to prompt to pick from a field. So sometimes parents reflected that they might take out some of the favorite foods to prompt them to make a choice between those favorite foods or toys or television shows. But the prompting has already sort of been initiated by them expressing that they want something or moving towards an area where those preferred items are. A little bit more complex, what kind of prompting is required in familiar routines, like greetings, openings, warm-ups, right? Well, again, routines are its own type of prompt. There's some kind of expectation there, some routine there, some motor memory if it's a very familiar routine. However, some of our students have some difficulty with transitions and moving across various tasks, and so they might need some kind of prompts. They might need a gesture to move to each part of a task, like brushing their teeth, or packing their backpack, or emptying their lunchbox, or even getting dressed. There are some tools that might help a student follow some routines, like visual schedules, first then boards, any of those types of pieces, but you might still see some success with a limited type of prompting. More complex, participating in a task. Now notice that I didn't necessarily say a motivating task, but these are tasks you might see at school, like craft time, coloring, academics, cooking, any of these tasks in which they're expected to participate as part of their schedule, or that just might happen day in and day out. What kind of prompting do they need to participate in that and be successful at it? Then responding to questions about a lesson. And this is probably our most complex, right? Because we talked about it at our table this week, that there's a lot of cognition involved. And we're going to talk a little bit more about cognition, emotion, and behavioral pieces that might interfere with participation in tasks in general. But there's a lot of pieces involved in answering questions. You need to know the answer. You need to know how to get someone's attention to say that answer. You need to use your receptive knowledge to create some kind of expressive piece to answer that question. You need to wait if it's not your turn. You need to listen to someone who might have already answered. So there's a lot of pieces moving there. And so there might be a higher level of prompting required for responding to questions. This warm-up is really just to get you thinking about how the one child might need various prompts depending on the task. And that's going to be another key takeaway from this part. What is a prompt hierarchy? A prompt hierarchy is a systematic method of assisting students in the learning and skill acquisition process. So like I said, we move across least to most, less intrusive to most intrusive, and they're really just used in order to get the student to do something when that's necessary. If they are independent or can pretty much do a task with very little support, we're not necessarily going to give them a high level of prompt. We want them to challenge themselves and use their problem-solving skill to complete that task. We only want to use them as long as is necessary because we don't want to create prompt dependency. Excuse me for switching that slide, but prompt dependency will be something that we will be talking about as well. So a prompt hierarchy, like I said, moves from most to least, particularly for new skills. So new skills, the child does not have experience learning about it yet. So we want to make sure that we're helping them by giving them the most amount of prompting to learn that skill, and then we're going to reduce it as they show progress. Whereas an emerging skill that maybe is a little bit inconsistent, but the teaching has already happened, we're going to still move across that hierarchy, but making sure that we're moving from least to most, right? We don't want to go to the most level if they've already learned it. So starting off high level of prompting for new things and starting off at a lower level of prompting for things that they've already had exposure to and they're just practicing. So prompting hierarchy, it should not be creating that prompt dependency that I was talking about. So prompt dependency meaning that we are then creating an environment in which the student knows that someone's going to be there to catch them when they fall. They shouldn't be used to fill quiet space, which we talked about in our wait time. We talked about how important wait time is for students processing, especially students who maybe need longer processing time. And we also talked about how not intruding into that thought process. We want to give them that quiet time, and that any interjections that we might have might delay that processing time. So this is a handout, again, in the email that I included, but this is probably my favorite prompt hierarchy because I find it the most natural. And when I say most natural, I mean that it's things that are already happening in our environment and that people are just doing all the time, and they don't necessarily realize they're using some kind of prompt hierarchy. This kind of breaks it down for you to show moving from the most to the least, so the most being red at this point, and the least being in the blue, the umbrella, or that green at the top, so creating motivation. And so I like, again, that this one too starts least at the top as opposed to starting with the most, and encouraging you to use some of those more natural cues first. So some highlights here. This one also includes aided language stimulation, which is a synonym for modeling. So modeling is part of this prompt hierarchy because we will see on a slide later on that modeling is can be a two-way thing. It can be independent of itself. It is just a strategy, an evidence-based strategy that we use, but it is also part of a prompt hierarchy because modeling is also prompting someone to learn something and do something. Again, we see motivation in here, the expectant pause, an indirect visual cue, meaning we might gesture to direct attention, but we're not going to directly point at something, which is a more direct visual cue. Again, an indirect verbal cue would be a hint at something, so maybe a wondering or a noticing sentence. So I mentioned my dishwasher earlier. I'm noticing that there's no dishes in the cabinet. I wonder where they could be. Well, that's hopefully prompting someone in my household to empty the dishwasher. Whereas instead of just saying the direct verbal cue of, please empty the dishwasher. So the non-direct model would be something like, hey, I think these are some options that we might have. So if you are hungry and you've told me you're hungry but you haven't asked for something to eat, let's look in your lunchbox and see what you have. You could choose a sandwich, you can choose some chips, you can choose some chocolate milk. And you're giving some options, but you're not exactly telling the person what they should say. And then again, it kind of cycles back to going back to creating motivation and re-exposing, so modeling some target vocabulary that a child might need. Another key point here is that some people at our table asked, well, how do I move across this hierarchy? What if my child doesn't respond to visual cues for a child who might have some vision impairments? Well, that's okay. You can move along because sometimes whether there's a challenge there or not, some kids respond to various prompts better on one day and not at all on a different day, right? This is a fluid process of using the prompts. So it's more to create awareness of where you are in the hierarchy and give you some options for prompting. So one prompt hear often in just the mainstream world is hand over hand. So hand over hand does not create autonomy, which is what we talked about at the beginning. Hand over hand was a very commonly used strategy in probably the 60s, 70s, and 80s until it was proven not accurate. A topic you might have heard of is facilitated communication, in which someone was guiding, a partner was guiding someone physically to be able to type or use some kind of communication system, and then calling those messages created independent messages of that communication user, a device user. So we've learned that unless the child has independently said it themselves without any type of physical prompting, it is not their thought. And so we really want to be careful of using hand over hand, because we're then really taking away that child's independence. If someone is using hand over hand, they're forcing communication rather than fostering communication. They're taking away of that idea of the child's voice versus your voice that you're using. And it's really, there's not a way to kind of get out of hand over hand, right? Someone is holding on to you and guiding you, and you feel forced to do something, you're complying, and you're not necessarily communicating. So a new term that is out there is called hand underhand. Still, I encourage everyone to tread lightly with this, but hand under hand allows a child who, I have many children who I've worked with who enjoy being part of that process with you. I call it hopping on. So I might be pointing to a communication system for modeling, and a child might literally put their hand over my hand. They've done that independently, and they also are in a position where they can remove their hand as quickly as they want. There's a link at the bottom where you see Practical AAC that gives some examples of what hand over hand might look like, and hand under hand, might look like. But we want to really just highlight that it gives control to the learner. Like I said, they can hop off, right, whenever they want. It's not as pushy. It's more respectful. It does encourage active participation for a child who might need some of that tactile feedback, and it can be reassuring for our communication users. Prompt dependence, again, let's just continue to highlight that, emerges from interactions which elicit compliance, not communication. So you might even say that hand over hand was really eliciting compliance, not communication. So repetition without variety of these prompts creates these kind of programmed responses. It's hard to break a prompting pattern. You want to be able to create those independent opportunities for students to explore, stumble upon words, learn what words mean when they're engaging in some babbling. But you want to make sure that while we do encourage you to start with the most level of prompting, especially for new skills, we expect them to be fated, and we expect them to be used fluidly. When there's a lot of prompting in an environment, there's usually not a lot of motivation, because someone's always there to tell you to get started on something or move through a task. Just another quote: wait expectantly. Sometimes silence is the best way to encourage AAC use. So again, we're highlighting about modeling. Modeling is, again, essential for teaching AAC. That's exactly why we're here. This whole Master PAL program is ways to help you become a good model communication partner. It's a behavior that you do, though, that does not involve touching the student. And so modeling can teach AAC. It's a known strategy, evidence-based strategy for students required by students in order to learn to use a communication system. But it's also prompting responses. Usually when you are modeling, you're encouraging someone to kind of jump in with you and get some ideas on what they should be talking about. And so prompting assumes a response is expected, right? You're prompting someone to do something, where modeling may not. So sometimes it is part of the prompting system, and you might move on to something more if there's no response after modeling some options, but it also doesn't always require a response. That's what was part of our acronym, right, as well, right? Response not required. So, tools versus prompts. So we talked a little bit at the beginning as we were warming up, some of the tools that I use. I use a calendar, I use some visuals, I use some written lists to kind of organize myself and get through tasks during my day, remind me of things I need to do. But my tools are not faded. If someone took away my calendar, I could promise you that I would have no idea where I'm supposed to be in given days. I wouldn't know when my meetings are or schedules that I've set. But a prompt can be faded, and that's the key difference there. Tools like first then boards, picture schedules, token boards, an AAC device, those are not going to be faded or taken away. They're creating those opportunities to participate in something, whereas prompts are providing support to learning new tasks and managing some of the tools that they're using, but they're faded so that people can use their tools on their own. Again, just highlighting a little bit about that motivation piece. We have self-determination and we have self-actualization. And both of these are internal. And we want to make sure that these prompts are still respectfully encouraging people to do things, but also allowing that determination and actualization to still exist. And that's the key piece of this slide. And as always, if there's any questions or comments on this section of the PowerPoint, please feel free to ask me and I'd be happy to clarify anything for you.